I remember the moment like it happened yesterday. Not the way it should have happened, but the way it actually did. The knock on the door was soft, polite. The kind of knock that carries a hidden weight. Like someone trying to convince you that everything is fine, when you already know it isn't. It was my daughter. She smiled. Her eyes looked gentle, concerned, but I could feel something else lurking beneath. "This is for your own good, Dad," she said. And with those words, everything changed. My name is Robert Hale. I'm 68 years old. I've spent my life giving everything to my children. Every sacrifice. Every sleepless night. Every opportunity one ever had, I gave it to them. And yet, here I was, staring at a reality I had never imagined. They were taking me to a nursing home. I remember thinking it was temporary at first. "It's just for a few weeks," my son had said. "Until we can make the house safer, Dad. You'll see. We're doing this because we love you." Love. A word I had spent decades living by. Only to find out that love sometimes comes with conditions. I didn't resist. I trusted them. Because that's what fathers do. The nursing home smelled like disinfectant and old furniture. Everything felt smaller. The bed. The window. Even my suitcase seemed too large for the space they'd given me. At first, the visits were frequent. They brought meals. They spoke to me. But slowly, the calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. Excuses grew. "I'm busy, Dad. We'll come next week, okay?" Next week came and went. And then the week after that. Months passed. I watched other residents. Some had families who visited every day. They laughed. They held hands. They brought flowers. Others, like me, stared at doors that never opened. Hopes that never returned. It was quiet. Too quiet. And in that quiet, I began to see the truth. They weren't visiting because they loved me. They were waiting. Waiting for the paperwork. The house. The accounts. The inheritance. I remember the day a nurse handed me a folder. "Your daughter asked us to make sure you signed this," she said softly. I didn't sign it. Not because I didn't trust her, but because for the first time, I asked myself a question I should have asked decades ago. If I died tomorrow, would they even come? Late one night, unable to sleep, I asked the nurse to bring my personal files. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked nervously to the door. Then she whispered, "Your children listed themselves as decision-makers, and marked you as declining mentally." Declining. I laughed quietly to myself. I was sharper than I had been in years. More aware. More alive. And that's when I decided. I wasn't going to wait for love anymore. I was going to prepare for truth. Over the next months, I quietly made changes. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But out of clarity. I met with lawyers. I revised my will. I recorded messages. I moved assets. I wanted to make sure the world saw the difference between true love and opportunism. The visits continued. They hugged me when they came. Smiled at me. Told me everything would be fine. And I smiled back. Because they had no idea. 6 months passed. I passed away quietly one morning. No fanfare. No fear. Just peace. At the reading of my will, my children sat front and center. Confident. Expectant. The lawyer began to speak. "The first asset," he said, "is the house on Maple Street." My children leaned forward. Anticipation written all over their faces. "The house has been donated to a foundation that provides housing for elderly individuals abandoned by their families." The lawyer continued. Shock. My daughter's hand flew to her mouth. My son's face turned pale. Not only were they excluded, they were invisible. Next, the savings. Every dollar I had earned over 4 decades gone. To be used exclusively for the nursing home, the lawyer said. For staff care, resident programs, and improvements in quality of life. The nurse who had stayed with me in the lonely nights covered her mouth. She understood. Then came letters. One for each child. Not accusations. Not hatred. Just truth. You once said this was temporary. Time proved it was not. You marked me as declining. But I was never clearer. You did not visit. You did not care. You waited only for papers and numbers. I gave you everything. And still, you left me. My daughter's knees shook. My son's jaw tightened. Finally, the life insurance. 7 figures. To be equally distributed among residents who received no visitors in their final 6 months. The room went silent. The shock was deafening. My children had expected everything. But they got nothing. And the final message. A recording played. Children, if you are listening, ask yourselves one question. Did you love me, or did you manage me? The recording ended. Silence. Truth doesn't need drama. Truth doesn't need music. Truth only needs presence. Weeks later, my name was placed on a plaque in the nursing home garden. Robert Hale, he remembered us. And for those who had been abandoned, they finally had someone who saw them. My children never came back. If you're listening to this, remember. The way people treat you when you are alive is the only inheritance you ever need to read. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can leave behind is the truth. The room was heavy with silence after the lawyer finished reading my will. My children sat frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Their hands fidgeted, feet tapped nervously, and yet not one word came out. It wasn't anger yet. It wasn't sorrow. It was something worse. Shock. They had spent so many years counting on inheritance, expecting it like a birthright. And suddenly, everything they assumed was gone. My daughter was the first to speak. This isn't fair, she stammered. Her voice shook, but it wasn't remorse. It was denial. Fair. That word always comes when someone loses what they already claimed. When someone realizes life doesn't owe them what they want. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, calm and measured. Your father's decisions were deliberate. Every step was documented. Every directive legal. My oldest son shook his head. He wouldn't. He couldn't do this. He muttered, almost to himself. He loved us. Yes. I did. But love has limits. Especially when it's ignored, neglected, and manipulated. The staff, who had witnessed my quiet preparation over the last year, watched silently. Some of them had tears in their eyes, remembering the nights I spent alone, reading legal papers under dim lights. They had watched me plan with clarity, patience, and purpose. I had done nothing in haste. Everything I left behind was precise. Every word, every dollar, every asset, chosen carefully to reveal the truth. Weeks passed after the reading. The media somehow caught wind of the story, a man abandoned by his own children, rewriting inheritance rules to benefit the forgotten. Headlines screamed, "Father leaves everything to nursing home residents he loved, children shocked." My children, who had always thrived on control and appearances, suddenly found themselves powerless. Then came the first twist. A letter arrived at their house, postmarked the day after the will was read. It wasn't from me, they assumed I was gone, but it carried my handwriting. Inside was a note. If you think this is the end, think again. You only learned the legal truth today. The emotional truth, the part that will haunt you, comes next. No signature. No hint of delivery. Just truth. My daughter screamed when she read it. My son turned pale, unable to move. They had no idea. They had barely scratched the surface. Meanwhile, at the nursing home, life began to change. Residents who had been forgotten suddenly found dignity and care they had never known. Staff were motivated. Programs were funded. The garden bloomed, vibrant and alive, just like the hope I wanted to leave behind. One man, whose family hadn't visited in 5 years, whispered. He remembered us. Even when they didn't. That was my final gift, not money. Not revenge in the obvious sense. But recognition, validation, and a lesson. My children didn't stop. They hired lawyers to contest every single decision. They dug into old bank accounts, old statements, anything they could find. But every time, the answer was the same, denied. And that's when the second twist hit. They discovered that the legal changes I had made over the past year weren't just about money. I had created a network of secret letters, recordings, and witnesses. Messages that revealed not just their neglect, but the way they had treated me behind the scenes. Conversations they thought were private, recorded with consent. Evidence of manipulation, of waiting for me to die so they could benefit. For the first time, they realized I had been several steps ahead. One evening, my daughter went to the nursing home. She said she just wanted to see where I had been living. She walked slowly down the halls. The smell hit her first. Antiseptic, old wood, faint perfume from flowers left by residents. She stopped at a room where an old man sat alone, staring out the window. No visitors. No calls. Just time. She finally understood. The emptiness she saw in his eyes was what I had lived for months before my death. And then, in the common room, she noticed the plaque. Robert Hale, he remembered us. Her knees went weak. She sank into a chair. And for the first time, she saw the impact of her neglect. The next twist was subtle, but devastating. The local media ran a follow-up story. Father's legacy, lessons in family, love, and neglect. My children were interviewed, and every word they spoke revealed their shame. Their friends and extended family questioned them. Neighbors whispered. Their reputations began to crumble, not because of anger, but because the truth had weight. And here's the cruel irony. They still hadn't learned the final truth. The most shocking twist? Hidden in my legal revisions was a final clause I had never mentioned to anyone. Every week, a secret fund would distribute small sums to anonymous nursing home residents. For things like birthdays, new books, even simple comforts. No one knew who was getting it. No one knew who I had helped. Except me. My children never saw it coming. They assumed their inheritance fight was the climax. But the real climax was in the lives I had touched quietly, invisibly, long after I was gone. I had left them with nothing. Yet I had given more than they could ever measure. And the final message? A recording sent to their email months later. Did you love me, or did you manage me? I lived in truth. I lived in clarity. And I gave my last gift to those who mattered, even when you could not. They listened in silence. The words pierced deeper than any courtroom. No lawyer could argue. No money could fix. They had lost not just inheritance, but respect, trust, and the chance to ever understand the measure of true love. At the nursing home, life flourished. Residents shared stories of me, the man who remembered the forgotten. Gardens bloomed. Art classes ran. Meals were warm. And for the first time in years, there was laughter. I had won, not through vengeance, but through presence, planning, and principle. And the most shocking truth? Sometimes, the best revenge isn't taking something away. It's showing what love and care really mean. And who truly deserves it. Months had passed since the reading of the will, but my children hadn't recovered. They moved through life like shadows of themselves, careful, cautious, haunted. Not by money. Not by legal defeat. But by the truth. By the reality that they had abandoned the one person who gave them everything, only to find he had outsmarted them in ways they couldn't even begin to understand. It was subtle at first. A friend called my daughter, asking quietly, "Are you okay? Did you ever visit your father at the nursing home?" She froze. Her mind raced. Even casual acquaintances now saw through the facade. Meanwhile, at the nursing home, I had become something of a legend. Residents whispered about the man who remembered us, and staff carried out little gestures that reflected the values I had left behind: kindness, patience, dignity. It wasn't just about the money. It was about acknowledgement, presence, and care. But the real drama was brewing elsewhere. Quietly, strategically, invisibly. My children believed they had lost everything. They were wrong. The final twist hadn't arrived yet. One afternoon, my daughter received a letter in an envelope she didn't recognize. The handwriting was familiar. Her stomach sank as she unfolded the paper. Inside I had written, "You've seen what I left in the open. But there is one final account. One final truth. The money you thought was gone entirely was never for you. It was for those who had no one. But the lesson for you is in what you missed." Asterisk. She read it twice. Her hands shook. Tears filled her eyes. It wasn't rage. It wasn't anger. It was shame. Weeks later, my son discovered something else. The hidden letters I had written to the nursing home staff weren't just words, they were instructions. Whenever you see a resident alone, give them a small gift. Whenever someone looks forgotten, acknowledge them. Teach them they matter. It was genius in its simplicity. Every dollar, every note, every action I had orchestrated after my death created a ripple effect that my children could never stop. Every time they thought they had control, they realized they had none. The most shocking part? One resident, a woman who hadn't spoken to anyone in years, suddenly started telling stories of me. She remembered me, she said. She visited when no one else did. Even after he passed, he still remembered us. My children heard about it. They wanted to intervene. But it was too late. Their father's legacy wasn't something they could touch. It existed in action, in hearts, in lives that mattered. The tension escalated one night when my daughter received a call from a reporter. "We're doing a follow-up story," the reporter said. "Your father's story is going viral. People are inspired. They want to know what true legacy means." She hung up, pale. She turned to my son. "Do you realize what this means?" Yes, they realized. They were being exposed. Not legally, not financially, but morally. The truth has a power far beyond law. It humbles. It humiliates. It teaches. And then came the revelation that would finally break them completely. I had kept one secret until the very end. Hidden in a safety deposit box was a final recording. Not of me talking. Of them. Every time they had discussed my decline. Every meeting about inheritance. Every casual remark about leaving me in the nursing home. I had recorded it. And the last message? A compilation of every careless word. Every plan they had made to benefit from my absence. Every time they spoke without care. The audio wasn't just evidence, it was truth exposed. When my daughter listened, she fainted with shock. Her son? Pale, trembling. They realized that their father had seen everything. All their calculations. All their excuses. All their planning. I had been aware the entire time. Not just aware, but prepared. And now the world knew. At the nursing home, life flourished. Residents smiled more. Gardens bloomed. Stories were shared. I had left a legacy that could not be touched by greed, envy, or selfishness. My children had believed they controlled my narrative. They had believed inheritance was power. They were wrong. The final, subtle twist. A month after the recordings were released to the public, donations to the nursing home increased dramatically. People read the story, watched the interviews, listened to the recordings, and acted. The forgotten residents had food, warmth, companionship. They had dignity. They had care. And my children? They had their lesson. Not in money. Not in revenge. But in truth. The last message I left them, years in the making, was simple. Love is measured in presence, not paperwork. Care is measured in actions, not promises. And legacy is measured in lives touched, not possessions gained. It was the ultimate twist of fate. They expected inheritance. They got exposure. They expected control. They got the realization that they had failed where it mattered most. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. You can give everything, be ignored, be abandoned. But if you leave a legacy built on truth, compassion, and presence, your impact will outlive anyone who doubted you. And sometimes, the most shocking revenge isn't in taking. It's in leaving the world better than it found you, while teaching those who ignored you the hardest lesson of all. It had been almost a year since my death, and yet my children were still haunted. Not by guilt. Not by money. But by awareness. Everywhere they looked, reminders of their mistakes appeared. A neighbor mentioned the story. A friend whispered the details. Even distant relatives had heard and were quietly judging. They thought they had power. They thought they had control. But the truth has a way of slipping past walls, past excuses, past carefully constructed facades. Meanwhile, the nursing home had transformed. What had once been a place of silence and neglect became alive with activity, warmth, and care. Staff were inspired by the legacy I left. Residents laughed. Meals were shared with dignity. Gardens bloomed under sunlight, and the halls echoed with life. I had left them more than money. I had left them respect. I had left them attention they had never received, even in the years they had been forgotten. And my children? They could only watch from a distance. The next twist came unexpectedly. My daughter received an anonymous message at work. "Do you remember your father? Do you remember the man you abandoned?" He remembered me. He remembered everyone. And now everyone knows. It wasn't signed. No one knew who sent it. But the message was enough. Enough to ignite panic, guilt, and anger simultaneously. She showed it to her brother. "We can't control this anymore," he said, voice shaking. "Everyone is talking about him. About what we did. About what we ignored." And that's when the real consequences began. The shocking part? They realized the world was watching the impact of my decisions. Local news ran stories about how I had transformed the lives of residents in that nursing home. Interviews, photographs, social media shares. "Robert Hale's legacy, a father who remembered the forgotten," one headline read. People everywhere began to see the difference between real care and inherited wealth. My children's friends, neighbors, and colleagues whispered. They were embarrassed. Exposed. And there was nothing they could do about it. But the story doesn't end there. One day, my daughter received a phone call from the nursing home. "Would you like to come and see the garden?" She hesitated. Part of her wanted to witness the change. Part of her feared what she might find. When she arrived, she saw it for herself. The garden bloomed with flowers, benches were placed under the sunlight, and residents were tending small vegetable patches. A group of elderly men and women were laughing together, sharing stories of past lives. And the plaque? She saw the plaque. "Robert Hale, he remembered us." She walked past it slowly, her heart heavy. My son never came. He couldn't. Shame has a way of rooting itself deep inside. Especially when pride is stripped away. And yet, the twist continued to unfold. Months later, the final revelation reached them. I had left them one more secret. A hidden audio archive. Every conversation they had about my decline. Every plan to benefit from my absence. Every casual remark they had made about inheritance. All recorded. Not to punish. Not to embarrass. But to reveal the truth. The recordings were shared with lawyers and media, ensuring that the world saw what had been done. The moment my daughter listened to them, she could barely breathe. She heard herself laughing at the thought of leaving me alone. She heard my son casually discussing how quickly the estate could be liquidated. She heard every selfish word, every plan, every excuse. And in those recordings, they finally realized something they had never understood. I had been aware the entire time. I had been watching. I had been preparing. The slow burn of justice had finally reached them. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It was awareness. The kind that stays with you long after you think it's gone. At the nursing home, residents continued to flourish. They spoke of me often, telling new arrivals about the man who remembered the forgotten. Even when he was gone, he made sure we mattered, one resident said quietly. I don't know anyone else who would do that. The staff carried out my instructions diligently. Small acts of kindness, small gestures of care. And the ripple effect spread far beyond what my children had imagined. Meanwhile, my children grew restless. They tried to challenge the will. They sought to reclaim assets. They tried to control the narrative. But they were too late. Every decision I had made was deliberate. Every word, every instruction, every plan, legally airtight. Emotionally undeniable. Morally irrefutable. The more they fought, the more they realized the magnitude of what they had lost. Then came the final, subtle twist. The anonymous letters, the media coverage, the public recognition. It had all been orchestrated to ensure they couldn't ignore the impact of their actions. Every phone call they received, every whispered conversation about me in their circles, every headline they read. It reminded them of their failures. And yet, the greatest impact wasn't on them. It was on the people I had cared for. Every forgotten resident had dignity. Every lonely elderly man or woman had warmth. Every day was brighter than it had been before. And the ultimate lesson of Part 4. You can try to control everything. You can wait for someone's absence to profit. You can manipulate circumstances in your favor. But truth and genuine care cannot be stolen. It manifests quietly. It grows slowly. It touches lives in ways the selfish can never understand. My children had thought that inheritance was everything. They had thought control over money equaled control over me. They were wrong. The final, unexpected twist? Months later, my daughter received a call from a resident's family. Your father changed our mother's life, they said. Even after he was gone, his legacy made her feel valued again. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't argue. All the wealth, all the power, all the control was meaningless compared to the truth of what I had left behind. And deep down, she finally understood. I had won. Not with anger. Not with revenge. Not with a courtroom. But with foresight, with love, and with truth. Months had passed since my daughter and son had felt the full weight of their mistakes. They lived in a quiet torment, a constant reminder that love, when taken for granted, comes back in ways you cannot control. I had already moved on. Not with anger. Not with resentment. But with peace. The nursing home thrived. Residents laughed. Gardens bloomed. Programs flourished. And everywhere, people whispered my name. Robert Hale, he remembered us. It was a legacy built not on money, but on presence, care, and truth. But the final twist, the one that would forever haunt my children, was yet to unfold. The day began quietly. My daughter received a letter at her office. She hesitated before opening it. The envelope was thick, heavy, postmarked weeks ago. Inside, a note written in my hand read, "This is not the end. You have seen the consequences of your neglect. You have watched the impact of your selfishness. But the world will now witness the full measure of what you lost." No signature. No sender. Just truth waiting to land. That night, my son received an email. Attached were dozens of photographs, letters, and recordings. Photos of nursing home events. Letters of gratitude from residents I had helped. Recordings of their laughter, their stories, their memories. And one file named simply, "For you, listen carefully." He clicked it, trembling. It was my voice. You thought absence would silence me. You thought neglect would erase me. But I left something far more powerful than wealth. I left dignity, care, and presence, where it mattered most. And you lost it all. Silence filled the room. No words could undo the realization that hit them like a tidal wave. The media picked up the story again. Father's legacy outshines greedy children, the man who remembered the forgotten. News anchors spoke of the records, the letters, the impact on the nursing home, and the public response. Comments poured in online. People shared their own stories of neglect and abandonment. They praised my actions. They condemned my children's behavior. The world knew. Then came the ultimate, final twist. A local documentary crew arrived at the nursing home, requesting interviews. They filmed staff, residents, volunteers, everyone who had been touched by the legacy I had left. The documentary would air nationally, highlighting not just the negligence of my children, but the extraordinary care and love that I had ensured would continue long after my passing. And here's the cruel beauty. My children were named in the documentary, not as villains, but as cautionary figures. The public would never forget their neglect. The shame they felt was permanent. The lesson was irreversible. My daughter tried to defend herself in the office of a lawyer. They'll never understand, she said. They don't know the full story. The lawyer looked at her calmly. They understand perfectly. Your actions, or lack of them, are clear. The world has seen what you did. The world has seen what he gave. And what you lost. Her face went pale. Meanwhile, life at the nursing home continued to blossom. Residents celebrated birthdays, small victories, and everyday moments. Staff took joy in their work. Visitors came, inspired by the story of a man who remembered the forgotten. Everywhere, I had left reminders of what true love and care mean. And finally, the last shocking twist arrived. Hidden in one of the letters I had left for my children was a simple instruction they had never understood. Every month, a gift will be sent anonymously to someone who feels forgotten. It could be money, care, or attention. You will never know who benefits. And that is the true measure of what you lost. My children had assumed inheritance meant control. They had assumed wealth meant power. But the real power had always been elsewhere, in the hands of those I truly cared for. They realized too late that they could never take it back. They could never influence it. And they could never undo the shame of neglect. The slow burn of justice finally reached its peak. My children's friends, neighbors, and relatives saw the truth for what it was. The story spread. They were questioned. Their reputation suffered, not legally, but morally. And the final blow? They realized that everything they had wanted, control, inheritance, attention, was meaningless compared to the legacy I had built. Meanwhile, the nursing home became a beacon of hope. Residents who had once been abandoned now lived with dignity. Their laughter echoed in the halls. Their stories were shared with the world. I had given them more than money. I had given them recognition, love, and a chance to feel human again. And that was the ultimate revenge. Months later, my daughter visited the nursing home again. She walked the halls slowly, taking in the sight of gardens in full bloom. She saw residents laughing together, telling stories, celebrating life. She saw staff going above and beyond. And she saw the plaque. Robert Hale, he remembered us. She knelt beside it. Her hands shook. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time, she understood the weight of her choices. The emptiness she had caused. The love she had ignored. The impact she could never reverse. My son never returned. Shame has a way of rooting itself so deeply that pride can never overcome it. He understood that some lessons are permanent. The final, ultimate lesson of all 5 parts. You can leave someone alive, abandoned, neglected. But if you live with truth, clarity, and purpose, your impact will outlive those who doubted you. Your presence is more powerful than wealth. Your care is stronger than inheritance. And your legacy cannot be stolen. The last recording I left for the world played quietly. Measure love by presence, not promises. Measure care by action, not words. and leave behind a legacy that cannot be forgotten. And with that, the story ended. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in truth, and in lives changed forever.